but I'm going to take payments. So maybe they can't pay me the whole amount that the business is worth up front, and perhaps they don't have the best credit, so they can't get a loan. So then I'll go ahead and, they'll give me a down payment, and then they'll make payments to me every month until it's paid off, or until they've built up enough equity that they can go get a loan now to cash me out, maybe in 10 years. That's a real common thing, to have payments for a period of time and then have a big balloon lump sum payment, and you go get a loan and pay them off. So as part of that, if I'm selling my business on payments, I want to maintain that control until I'm paid off. Now I don't mind, you're going to get the profit, but I want to, if you default, I want to take the business back over. And so I would retain the right of proxy to be able to vote that. In the event of a default, I would automatically be able to basically take the company back. So that provides a way in the event of a default, of essentially repossessing the company through the use of a proxy. So different ways that proxies can be dealt with. Again, these need to be in writing, they need to be well detailed, and tailored to the particular situation you're trying to accomplish. And this slide, here, I give you the kind of that example in this slide right here. Okay. We talked about this a little bit, but let's get a little bit more detail. So another form of, and again, this goes back to shareholder agreement, but this may be a completely self-standing document, which may be entered into at any time. And that's a right of first refusal. This is abbreviated as ROFR. So a right of first refusal is a document that basically gives someone else the right to, number one, have the first crack at buying something if somebody wants to sell. These are really common in real estate. We see these a lot in a lease. I see these quite often in agricultural leases where a farmer is leasing farm ground, and as part of that there's a provision in the agricultural lease that says if the owner of that farm ground is going to sell, they first will offer to sell it to the farmer that's farming the ground as part of the lease agreement itself. And that way the farmer knows that if somebody's going to sell, they'll be able to carry on farming that ground. They may have a crop that's a perennial, maybe a 5-year crop like grass seeds, some of the perennial grass seeds, or it could be a longer term thing like a hazelnut orchard, or having a brain, you make beer with hops, right? Hops, which are very extensive, or vineyard land, that may be a 20 or 30-year lease. And so if you're the farmer, you want to have a right of first refusal as part of your lease. That way you know that if the person either dies or they're going to sell the property, you'll first be able to have the opportunity to buy it, if you can. This doesn't give you the ability to make up your own terms. It would have to be on a fair market value. Same thing in terms of stock ownership in a company. Right of first refusal may be tailored. So I may go to another owner and say, have a side deal where I buy from them and pay them for that right of first refusal. So if they want to sell out, I would have that first right to buy it before any of the other owners, kind of a under the table side deal kind of thing. The other way that we see this is in a deed restriction. For real estate, kind of bleeding over to real estate a little bit, but oftentimes we'll see a situation where somebody will sell land, and as part of the sale, if the person that buys it from them wants to sell it again in the future, they first would have to offer it back to the original seller to retain a right of first refusal. And that way you can control who buys it in the future, and that kind of thing. So this gives the opportunity if an owner of a business wants to sell, they can first require other family members or other owners to buy it. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. You have to notify that you want to sell. The other way that this works is, let me go to the next slide here. Another way that we'll see a right of first refusal, and this gets to be a little bit tricky. So there's kind of two types of rights of first refusal, and sometimes they're both. One is if I want to sell before I can even put it out on the open market, I have to go to the other owners first. The other type of right of refusal, first refusal, is if I receive an offer to purchase my business, my land, my building, my farm ground, or whatever it may be. If I receive a third-party offer, then I have to go back and allow whoever holds that right of first refusal the ability to match it. Okay? You see this, again, quite often in real estate, and especially in agriculture and other commercial properties. So one type of right of first refusal, I want to sell, I got to give you advance notice. That's one. A different type is built into the, for example, the deed to the property before I can sell it. Or if I get a third-party offer, so I go ahead and put it on the market, I'm trying to get an offer on the property, and somebody shows up and wants to purchase the property, they write out an offer. I then have to allow the person who holds that right of first refusal the ability to match that offer. And usually there'll be a time limit, like 30 or 45 days. Now, if you ever go into real estate, if you're a real estate agent or whatever, where you come across this, this can be very tricky. Not just in real estate, but in business. Because now, you're trying to find a buyer, but the buyer may or may not be able to actually be the buyer because a third party has the ability to match the offer. So this is very difficult when you're negotiating because, one, you have to disclose that to a potential buyer, that their offer that they're making may be overridden by somebody else. Now the problem is, if I'm a buyer, I don't want to disclose how much I'll pay, right, and then have somebody buy it out from underneath me. And this can create kind of a chicken and the egg problem. I have one situation where this occurred, kind of a sneaky thing. I had a client that had a family-run business, and they entered into a marketing arrangement where another company, this is a big company, that did shipping and packaging and internet sales, and basically they took care of all their marketing, shipping, distribution, labeling, product handling, and they had this huge, thick contract. It's actually a multinational company that does this for a lot of different businesses. And tucked away in that 85-page contract was a little paragraph that gave that company a right of first refusal in the event they wanted to sell their business. They had the right to match any bona fide third-party offer. Now my client looked, they didn't talk to me or any other attorney about it, they just signed it. It was kind of like one of those, you agree to the terms, you click the box and hit the yes button, and you never read the thing on Google or whatever. This was actually a hard, physical contract, not just electronic. But they didn't really read through it, and they skimmed right over that part, never thought anything of it. Well, now they want to go retire. So they want to sell the business, and they actually wanted to sell it to their employees. And so they hadn't realized they had that in there, so they entered into a contract with their employees. The company found out about it and said, hey, wait a minute, we have a right to match that offer. And it just tanked the whole thing. So they ended up having to buy off that other company. They ended up paying them, I can't remember what it was. There were some commas involved, a lot of money, just to get rid of that. And I think that's kind of why they stuck that in there. That was their little gimmick. You gotta be careful about that. That's why you've gotta read contracts, right? So this can be used as a way to get your hooks, so to speak, into real estate or business. I think it's a little bit sneaky, but it's technically legal, it's in the contract. So it's something I want you to be aware of because this can be a real problem. I myself am not a big fan of right of first refusals in that kind of a context. I am in a family business situation where you don't want to sell your shares outside the family, but in terms like if you're going to lease property, if you're the owner of the property, I don't like to give right of first refusals to my tenants just because it can come back to bite you in that way. Same thing with a business marketing or other kind of contract. So just be aware of that because it can lead to a problem. I actually have one of those situations right now with a real estate deal I'm working on where the family sold, it was farmland, the family sold the farm to another neighbor, like 40 years ago. But the family held back a right of first refusal. And that trickled down to their heirs. So now we're 40 years later, the original people are all long gone dead. So now I've got to track down all of the heirs they're scattered throughout the United States. And now I got to get them, we've got a buyer for the property. And I know they're not going to want to buy it back because it's a unique property. So I now have to track down all of those heirs to get them to release that right of first refusal. And it's a nightmare. I mean, I've got to hire a genealogist and track it all down. And I mean, it could just lead to a lot of problems. So they can be very beneficial, but they can also be a big detriment. Okay, I'm not going to go through every single one of these. All right. Option to purchase. Similar to a right of first refusal. So an option to purchase is an agreement where the person who holds the option has the right to force the sale of something or force another person to buy something, depending on how it's structured. So an option to purchase or an option to sell. Now these are the same thing as in the stock market where you can go buy stock options, you can buy calls and puts. That's a form of this. But what I'm talking about in this context is more in terms of a business, ownership, or real estate. So an option to purchase basically is where I pay someone to have the right for a certain period of time to buy something for a set price, and during that time period they cannot sell to anyone else, and I can force them to sell it to me. So let me give you an example. Did I put an example in here? I can't remember. So let's just say here's our building. Let's just say it's a manufacturing building or office building. It doesn't matter what. So I pay you $5,000 today for the option to buy. Say it's a $1 million building. Okay? So I'm going to pay you $5,000 cash today for the right to buy that building for $1 million at any time in the next 12 months. It's a 12-month option. 12 months. So that gives me the exclusive right, if I want to force you to sell me the building for $1 million anytime in the next 12 months. Now I have to pay you extra for that. I pay you $5,000 now. And the reason why I pay you extra for that is basically you're wrapping or you're locking that building down. You can't sell to anyone else. So if somebody shows up and wants to offer you $1.5 million, you can't sell it to them because I have that right. So that's why I pay you extra for it. And you want to make sure if you're selling this kind of thing, if you're going to sell an option to buy, make sure that you get sufficient amount of money that will compensate you for taking it off the market, because that's essentially what you're doing. So in a real estate context, this would give me the right to buy that building at any time in the next year. Now, I have the right to buy it, but I don't have to. I'm not under a requirement that I buy the building. It's totally at my option. If I decide I don't want to buy it, or I just flat out never call you back, and the option period expires, then you're free to sell to whoever you want after a year. But at any time during that year, I can call you out. That's where we get the term call option. You may have heard of that before, a call option. A call option is where you have the right to buy something, real estate, a business, a share of stock, Microsoft or whatever, anytime for a set price in the future. The other type of option is the right to sell. So I could force you to buy it from me for $1 million anytime in the next 12 months. So those are not really common. It's called a put option. I could put it to you, you have to buy it from me. Whether you like it or not, you got to buy it from me. In stock, that's called shorting stock. But what I'm talking about here in a small business context is a little bit different. What I'm talking about is back to that forced buyout situation. So again, let's say that I'm going to bring in the next generation or a third party unrelated to the business, a new owner. I'm going to sell you on payments. This is kind of like the proxy I talked about earlier, but it's different. The option gives me the right to buy back what I sold you. So if I don't like the way the business is going, or you and I don't get along, or whatever, you die or you file bankruptcy, I can force you to sell me back your shares in the business for a set price for a certain period of time. Really, really common in a sales contract for selling a business, where I sell to you on payments. I'm going to hold back that option to buy back, and basically the way that would work is I would have the right to buy back your ownership interest by repaying you what you paid me up to that point. Or something like that. Now this is a very powerful tool. Again, it can be used in different ways. Primarily where you'll see this is when you're taking payments on something, but also it could be used again in a situation where you have multi-generational transfers where maybe a parent dies and they're one of 4 other owners in the family, and then their shares transfer to their children. Well, maybe you have a 1-year period where if the other owners don't really like what's going on, they would have the right to buy out the children of the deceased sibling, their nieces and nephews. Again, that can be kind of a brutal thing. I mean, you're basically forcing your niece or nephew to sell your share back to you. But again, it's a way to maintain this control in a smaller family-run business by having this built in. And this can be done as a separate agreement, or it can be done as part of that shareholder agreement I talked about earlier. But this is a real common way to maintain that control. And again, this can also be used in a bankruptcy situation where if somebody declares bankruptcy or they get divorced, the other owners have the absolute right to buy that share back, maybe for pennies on the dollar. Sometimes it's called a poison pill. That's kind of what's going on right now with Twitter and Elon Musk. You guys seen that in the news. The board of directors did a thing it's called a poison pill to prevent a hostile merger, hostile takeover. This is one of the different ways you can do that as well through purchase options. All right, I'm not going to go through all the words on here. So, we've talked about all this here.